Welcome back to part two. So we're going to be looking for, we're looking at a few different things, but to begin with, let's crack into bait and the little edges that I employ to try and give me a head start in the winter. Liquid edges in particular. Liquids are a big part of my carp fishing anyway, but in the winter I think they're absolutely essential. So before we get into that, ostensibly there's two key ways of fishing in the winter. Is your lake a boilie lake, or is your lake going to respond better to maggots? So over the years I fished a lot of different lakes, and I have to say the majority of those have responded best to maggots and boilie crumb. Without any shadow of doubt, my best winter sessions, the majority of my best winter sessions and best winters per se, have been using boilie crumb, ground bait mixes with liquids and with maggots with a maggot hook bait. If I was only allowed to fish one way in the winter, that is unquestionably what I would choose to do. During a few decades, every now and again I've come across lakes where the fish are willing to carry on eating boilies throughout the winter. Now they are very rare, but they do happen sometimes with bigger, older fish. And you know, when I've just was fishing a little day ticket lake in Essex a couple of weeks ago, and it was this 12mm Manila active and a catapult, and you see a fish, a couple of pouches of boilies, and a matching hook bait, and away you go. As I said, the majority of the time it's about a mix, and it's about applying a mix and using maggots. Maggots are a secret weapon. Not a secret weapon. Maggots are a massive nuclear weapon when it comes to carp fishing, to the point that if I wasn't allowed to use maggots at a particular venue, then I would think seriously about whether I was going to fish it, because I can think of so many circumstances where not having maggots in the swim, it literally makes it pointless. You just cannot get a bite on some lakes without having maggots in the swim. That's how vital they can be. But it's not just about maggots, it's about what you do with the maggots and what you mix with them, and how you create, in my view, the ultimate winter mix. So let's start off with the liquids. You probably heard about this guy, Bailey's Irish Cream. I still get messages asking me if this is real or a wind-up. It's not a wind-up. This is absolutely phenomenal. You can buy this in different flavours, the caramel, the hazelnut, they all work well. I've not used the orange. I think there's an orange one. I've not used that one. But the original will stand you in perfectly good stead. And it's, I don't know, 15 quid or something a bottle. It's great in a coffee in the evening, but we're more interested in, or equally interested in, using it for the carp. Now, I add this to ground baits, boilie crumbs and so on, as I'm going to show you shortly. It's also great as a hook bait glug. It's no great secret that carp love anything alcohol based. I remember a few years ago there was a guy on a syndicate I was fishing who did really, really well on hook bait soaked in vodka, and he caught more than his share. There's various other things. 𝗀𝗿𝗰𝗹𝘂𝗱, you know, is another good one. Different bourbons. Carp do like alcohol, so if you want to experiment, you know, then give them a glaze, give them in a tub, and give that a go. It'll be certainly different from the mainstream, which is what we're always looking to be. Bailey's itself is a superb hook bait glug, so if you want to get a few in a pot and glaze them over with this, bottom baits or pop-ups or wafters, it's a really, really good additive. One that I've been using now for, I don't know, 15 years I suppose, something like that. So during the winter months I do quite often like to use the Manila active, which I will talk a bit about in a minute. So the liquid that complements it is a bit of a no-brainer really. So I tend to mix this with the Baileys. I'll show you in a minute exactly what I do. But there's one other liquid that I add to those, which really is the bomb, and it's this guy, Carnation condensed milk. Now, this is like dark matter. This is like the middle of a black hole. It is so dense, it's incredible. If you put this in a big slingshot, you could fire this about 2 miles. It weighs more than a house brick. It's condensed in every way you can imagine. It is the sweetest, stickiest, gloopiest milk additive you could ever get. And it tastes divine. Absolutely incredible. My God. This is a massive edge. It complements the Manila so well, or whatever bait you're using. If you're using a sweet creamy bait, you know, there aren't any rules. And I like to mix a bit of Baileys with a bit of carnation, with a bit of the cloudy Manila liquid to make what I think is the ultimate liquid additive. And I use that to add to the crumb. So I've got here my pan and a stove. Now, this is very, very, very thick, and it won't really work itself into the crumb. It's a bit too gloopy, so I thin it out with the Baileys and with the cloudy Manila liquid. So let's start off by getting a good slug of this. Oh. Too good to waste. That is nearly Christmas, what the hell. Right, we'll stick a bit of that in there, like so. Oh dear, I might finish work early today. This guy is like all of the liquid additives, you can't overdo it. So, I mean, you can you can overdo it on yourself, but in terms of for the carp, there aren't any rules, you know. I tend to do like whatever looks right, a third, and a third, but don't get too preoccupied in so many mil of that, and I don't think it really matters. Just a mixture of all three. So next we'll get some of our Manila liquid. Again, I don't give carp anything that I wouldn't have myself. That is insane. It's like the best Oreo vanilla milkshake that you ever had in the cinema when we used to be allowed to go in those places. Amazing. So we stick a glug of that in, like so. And finally, turning into a fat bloke in front of your eyes. Finally, some of the condensed milk. We'll give it a nice big dollop of that. There we go. As you can see, it's super, super thick and creamy. So we've got the 3 guys in there, and we're going to now heat it very, very gently. Now, if you heat this too quickly, the condensed milk will crystallise and turn to toffee. It's another great trick I found when I was alone in the bivvy one night. Put on another half stone then. So what we're going to do is just stir this gently until it's all homogenised, mixed together that means, and just gently heating it. You'll get all 3 of those components to blend in. Absolutely beautiful. Keep stirring it. You don't want to scorch it, burn it or boil it. The objective is just to warm it through so that all 3 of those liquids are beautifully mixed together and flowing evenly. There we go. It's just starting to bubble a bit, so I'll lift that off the heat. Now, that is one of, if not the finest liquid attraction concoctions you could ever present to a carp. You could use that to glaze whole boilies, you could use it to glaze hook baits, or you can use it to put into ground bait mixes and boilie crumb, which is what I'm going to show you now. Again, going back through a lot of decades of winter carp fishing, the boilie crumb, liquids like this and the maggot combination is a surefire winner. And even if you've got lots of silvers and so on in your lake, it doesn't seem to matter too much. The silvers do back off a lot in the winter, and fishing a good sized maggot hook bait, which I'll show you later, definitely seems to deter them. In fact, I can't remember the last time I wound in a silverfish on the end of a carp rig doing this. So what I'm going to do, get an empty bucket, and what I would normally do is just get a load of boilies and crush them up into a fine crumb. Just do them with your fingers, or in actual fact what I do tend to do is use the old Kenwood multi-chef. So I've got that at home, didn't bring it with me on this trip, but I would usually make a couple of kilos of crumb, stick the crumb into the food blender and turn it up into nice fine crumb with a few coarser bits in there as well. and make yourself a couple of kilos of crumb. Now, or as much as you need. You know, there aren't any rules. If you're just going for a day trip, then maybe 2 or 3 pints of maggots mixed with a kilo of crumb will be ample. If you're going for a bit longer, make a bit more. So let's pretend we've got a couple of kilos of crushed up manila boilies in there. Then we're going to add some pellets. Good old bloodworm pellets, absolutely phenomenal. Great attractor all times of the year. I will also add some manila pellets if I've got any. I haven't got any here, but a mixture of bloodworm and manila pellets in the 2.3mm size. Again, in the winter, it's very much about small food items and small pellets, bits of boilie crumb, maggots. That's how it works. You don't want any great big pellets or whole boilies in there, really, in my opinion. Now, at this stage, I will add some manila active mix. Get that in there as well. Beautifully creamy blend of powders. You see that's gone all, so look, flipping mouse. It's been in my bivvy during the night and eating a hole in that. I am so annoyed. It's all over me. And after that, if you really want to boost your bait up, a couple of scoops of something like liver powder, pure natural betaine, or green lit mussel. I usually put in a tablespoon or 2 of those each. And I'll give it a proper good mix up. Like an IB for DJ. Get that all going in there like so. Until we have a nicely mixed up dry powder and pellet mix, to which of course we will add our maggots. Again, there's no rules on ratio or anything like that, but generally speaking, a pint of maggots to a kilo of crumb, something like that, is probably not too far off. Now once I've mixed that in, I'm going to get our warm liquid and I'm going to pour that in a bit at a time. Now this is key. You don't want your powders to get super saturated in the liquid. You want them to be damp and you want the liquid to be evenly mixed throughout. So the secret is to do it a little bit at a time and to keep on mixing until it's fully dispersed. Once you've done that, you're going to add a bit more and you keep on going. Oh, so good. Now the objective is to create a mix which is damp rather than soaking wet and clumping together in lumps. You just want something that is damp so that when you squeeze it lightly by hand, it just about binds together. When it's like that, it will be nice and active on the lake bed rather than sitting in a big congealed lump. A really good thing to do when you're adding liquids to this sort of mix is to add them and then leave it for an hour or so, and you'll find that the pellets and the bigger pieces of boilies will have absorbed some of that liquid and it will start to dry out, and you find that very often you can get away with adding a little bit more. So let's break up a couple of those bigger pieces. We end up with a mix that is something like this. If I squeeze it, you can see it's just damp enough just about to hold together. There are very, very few better winter carp bait combinations than this, I promise you. Whether you don't even have, you know, if whatever your bait affiliation is, it doesn't matter. The liquids are absolutely key, and you can create anything really. I mean, you could add 𝗀𝗲𝗀 to this and that would probably work really well, but I haven't experimented with that. But certainly the things that I've just shown you work really, really well. So to this mix, or not to this mix, but this mix can be used several different ways. My general sort of modus operandi is to use a spom and to bait accurately where I've seen fish activity or where I know the fish are. A good rule of thumb is, let's say something, if you're using the large size spom, let's assume you're fishing a well-stocked lake, you know, 100 or more fish in it. It could be less and you just know you're near the fish, but a good starting point for the amount of bait to put in when it's cold, if you've got say 2 rods on a spot, and you're putting in a mix like this is maybe to put in, if the weather's good, then maybe 10 or so large spoms over 2 rods, you know, in one area. If it's really brutal like this, then I'd probably halve that. And if I got any activity, caught a fish, then I'd be looking to put in half as much again to keep the swim topped up. What this mix is great for is making tiny, tiny little PVA mesh bags. We're going to be looking into a whole different way of using this with PVA a bit later on. But generally speaking, I'll use the spom to add it to the swim, and I will hook on little golf ball sized bags, you know, of the mix, and I'll just hook those onto the rig and cast that out there. And a little PVA ball of ground bait mix and a maggot hook bait has actually had a liner there, fantastic, is how I've caught 90% of all the carp I've been lucky enough to catch over winters gone by. Hook baits are absolutely key. As I've mentioned many times before, I do very much favour a hook bait which is whispering seductively to the fish rather than shouting like a idiot TV presenter. So I would tend to say something like this is topped with maggots, which I'll show you how I make my rig shortly, is going to be very, very much more preferential than a neon pink pop-up. One interesting observation that I've made is that, and it's happened to me on a lot of lakes over the last few years, is that if a bird gets caught, a coot or a tufty, very often I will be the only person on the lake that catches it. I've seen this happen at Bayswater, Sandhurst, different syndicates. Now, why is that? Why am I the only person catching a coot or a tufty? If you cast your mind back a fair few years, it was all about everyone was getting on bright hook baits, and the birds would come over and you get dancing bobbins as they were diving on the bait. Then you pull up tight and you would hook a tufty and bring it in and let it go. But that got less and less and less of an occurrence, and it got to the point where if you fish a bed of bait and the tufties come over and it's too much daylight to use a laser pen, so you've got to suffer them and they start diving, they could dive on you for half an hour and you won't have a single bleep. Seen it on other people's swims and had it on mine a couple of times before I realised what was going on. The reason for that is that the birds have learned that anything bright, I've said this before in these videos, but sorry to repeat myself, if there's something bright and obvious on the bottom, it's quite clear the birds are avoiding it. They know. So if the birds have learned, you know, it's pretty much safe to say that the carp will have learned as well. So I'm catching, I caught a tufty last week on another lake and a coot as well. And they always come on little bits of 𝗶𝗰𝗹𝘂𝗀𝗃 or a little bit of dumbbell wafter or something, because it just looks like a bit of innocuous safe bait lying on the bottom. The birds will pick it up, the carp will pick it up, and vice versa. So total faith in that. You know, I mean, people think that there's been a lot of brainwashing with bright hook baits over the years. I mean, there's very, very few places now. The syndicate I'm at now is a different proposition, because here for some reason they just seem to respond best to bright pop-ups, but I cannot think of anywhere else that I've been in the last few years where that is the case. It's all about giving the carp something that looks natural, and they will pick it up without hesitation if you do that. So we're going to look at hook baits in conjunction with maggots later on. In the meantime, I'm going to get a spoon and drink. No, I'll just drink it out of the saucepan, shall I? Bonjour. So the rig that I use an awful lot of the time for fishing little maggot hook baits, or actually for fishing a popped up maggot hook bait, is this, which is just a very short braided hook link, totally soft and supple. I tend to fish it in conjunction with a bag, which we're going to move on to, so I like a nice short link. The hook is attached using a loop, so it's a multi-rig style setup, and I've sheathed it with a little bit of silicone, and I've got putty just outside the hook like that. Now it's similar to the rig that I showed in the presentation video, whereby I've got a nice low-lying presentation with lots and lots of movement without any clunky Ronnie type quick change swivels or anything like that. Personal preference, but it's what I like. So I've got a hook there which is about a size 7 or so. little micro ring swivel on the back of the hook. And what I do is just cut that bit of floss off. The first job is to get a little pop up. So I've got a little 10 or 11 mil homemade manila pop up there, super buoyant. And what I'm going to do is just thread on a bit of floss through the eye of the swivel, like this. That just goes through there like that, and then bring it back up so that you've got a nice length running through your rig, and cut that off. And we're going to then thread our pop-up down onto that micro ring swivel. So I'm just going to pop that buoy onto a needle like that, and then using a gate latch needle is always a lot easier. Just pop the bait on and slide it down until the swivel barrel, but not the actual eye of the swivel or the ring, just the barrel, is fully inside the pop-up. Hopefully you can see that okay. The next job is to thread on the wrigglers. So get yourself a needle, got an old bit of cotton on there which we don't need, and just pop the floss through the eye of your needle. There you go. Look, I did that without glasses, even at my age. Fantastic. Like so. So they've got the bait on there. We don't need the other tag end. We've just got this end threaded through the eye of a needle to mount some maggots on. So we get these out of the way, get ourselves some maggots. Do like a red maggot, and probably most of my winter maggot fishing has revolved around reds, but whites work really well. I've dabbled with bronzes and pinks and different colours as well, and they work, but I always find myself coming back to the nice natural look of a red maggot. Let's get some. You can tell how cold it is this morning. These maggots are very, very slow and inactive, which is pretty much what you want. You know, if you're going to put a load of really hyperactive, super active, super wriggling maggots into your swim, they will disappear at some rate into the silt and under stones and leaves and so on. So if I've got semi-torpid maggots, I'm a happy man. So there we go. We're going to thread those down on top of the pop-up, take the needle off, and then all I do, holding the hook link between my knees to give it some kind of tension, I'm just going to tie some overhand knots to secure those maggots down on top of the pop-up, like so. There we go. Grab some scissors, just trim the ends off a couple of mil short, and that is all you'll need to do to secure that, and that is your finished rig. Now, absolutely phenomenally effective, whether it's over bait, as a single hook bait as well, and that is all you need really for winter carp fishing. When you drop that into the edge, it's just a super attractive ball of maggots, and because the hook bait is quite large, I never find it gets picked at or whittled away by fry or smaller fish at all. It's a real good big fish presentation. It's caught me an awful lot of my winter carp over the last few years, and it's the first port of call that I go to on every winter session now. What I do like to use in conjunction with this is a PVA setup, but it's not your normal run-of-the-mill PVA setup. It's something that I've developed myself and I call the depth charge, and it complements this rig absolutely perfectly, and we're going to look at that next. So maggots form the main baiting attack for me throughout the winter months, combined with the things that I've shown you, the powders and the liquids to create something that I think is an unbeatable combination. Maggots are a bit tricky. They're tricky on the wallet. There's no doubt about that, but it's a necessary cost. And as I said to you before, that there are some places where if I was prohibited from using maggots, I probably wouldn't go, because the carp can prove in some cases almost impossible to catch without having them in your armoury. Keeping maggots is problematic, and I find that when they're mixed with lots of powders and crushed up 𝗀𝗰𝗃𝗀𝗃 and so on, then it isn't too much of an issue. But lots of maggots on their own in a bucket can be prone to sweat even in very cold weather, which is something you want to avoid because of the ammonia secretions and so on. I don't think they're particularly attractive like that, although carp will eat them. And it's not good for the overall health of your bait anyway. You want to keep it clean, fresh and vibrant and active. So if you've got a lot of maggots and you need to keep them dormant or semi-dormant, then the best way to do that is by suffocation. So if and actually this is something that I like to do for all of my maggots in the winter anyway, because when you suffocate maggots down in a bin bag or whatever you choose to use, and you suck all the air out of it and virtually shrink wrap them, then maggots will stay in that stasis for maybe, this time of year, kept cool, up to a week, and will still come back to life when you let them out. You give them a couple of hours and you start seeing little bits of movement, and slowly they come back to life. And for me in the winter, I think that's probably the perfect combination, is 2/3 of your mix being half woken up maggots where they're just starting to, and the other half quite active. And then when they go into the cold water, you're going to have plenty of bait available to the carp. And if you just put out super active, really wriggly maggots, then a lot of them on a soft bottom will tend to disappear. Doesn't preclude your chances of attracting and catching carp, but I like to have bait available visually and easy to find for the fish. So a combination of suffocated and partially awoke maggots or wake maggots is a good way to attack it. So shrink wrap in, take all the oxygen out the bag, keep them cool, and they will keep for a long time like that. When you get your maggots in the shop, tend not to like loads of sawdust or anything like that. Sawdust is a bit of a nightmare. Obviously it all floats. You see people, like if you're using maggots and you're spodding out and you've got sawdust in it and the seagulls are dive bombing you and everything, it just creates unnecessary attention from all angles. So if you're going to buy them, or when you buy them, get them home. A little bit of maize meal in the shop is okay, but then I like to introduce them to the 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. And I think when you introduce them to the 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃 and that is not saturated but moistened with the liquids that I showed you earlier on, then over the course of 24 hours, a lot of that will start to infuse into the maggots and they'll get sweetened and become even more attractive. So the rig that I like to present maggots on, it's varied a bit down the years. It still varies sometimes session to session, but I remember back in 1998 winter and into 99 when I was using maggots a lot, and they weren't mainstream at all then. Me and my friend Keith Moores used to use them for winter carp fishing, and it was an absolute game changer. We used them at Lynch Hill on Christchurch Lake, and when no one else was catching anything, I was able to get fish on the coldest of mornings when it was -5, -6. Well, I used to go when it was that cold when I was younger, but and maggots were an absolute weapon. And like I say, it wasn't mainstream, wasn't written about or anything. And I ended up doing some work with 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃 at the Angling Times, and we did some features on them. And at the time they weren't out there, and the rig that I used was just a threaded up ball of maggots. So 21 maggots typically threaded onto a little ring on the back of the hook. Still a hook bait style that I use. I've caught fish on it this year. Works really, really well. That big mouthful of maggots, usually 2 or 3 rubber ones mixed in there as well. That's a really, really good presentation for fishing on the deck. We've got another helicopter coming over. And more latterly, I've tended to fish them with a tiny pop-up and present it very low to the bottom with a bunch of maggots just attached to the pop-up. So if I'm fishing a rig like that with a big bunch of maggots, that tends to be if I'm threading on maybe a little golf ball of the mix, a PVA mesh golf ball sized bag of the mix hooked onto the thing and then hooked onto the rig, and then fish with a few spoms of the same mix over the top. The last couple of winters I've tended to fish a total PVA presentation without even using the spom at all. And for that I do prefer a low lying pop-up, and that's topped with a few maggots. The reason for that is I tend to attach it to the side of a big bag, and you never quite know which way that bag's going to land. So with a pop-up that's fairly well balanced, however that bag lands on the bottom, that pop-up will always wriggle up and make itself available, where there's a chance that maybe a completely static bottom bait could be underneath the entire pile. So the rig that I've tended to use in the last few years incorporates, as I said, a small little homemade pop-up, a few maggots on top of it, and I'm going to show you that next. So solid bags are widely accepted as a really, really good carp fishing tactic. Something I've used a lot down the years, and it's something that people like 𝗀𝗿𝗁𝗀𝗂 and various others put to really, really good effect. I've always found them very fiddly and never been completely happy with them, to be honest. I don't like, particularly with super hand-honed, sharpened hook points, as you would have seen in the rigs video. I don't like the idea of packing that in with all those tiny little bait particulate and getting it all tight, because I worry about the hook point getting masked. I've tried ways to get around that, but I'm not really happy with it. And I don't like having all the rig and the lead and everything all packed in there next to each other. It's just a personal thing. So I wanted to come up with a way of fishing a PVA presentation that cast really, really well, that was efficient and quick and easy to use, much quicker and easier to use than a solid bag system. Notwithstanding the fact that if you are using a solid bag system, you can make it a lot more user friendly in terms of speed and stealth by pre-making them. It's something that I wrote about in about 2006 when we were doing the 𝗶𝗰𝗁𝗀𝗂 competition fishing, and bags were the way to be fishing some of those venues. And I wrote about a way of doing it that, I'm not saying I was the first to do it, but I wrote about a way of doing it whereby I'd make up lots of bags with the lead and the rig inside on short little leaders like that, make up maybe 30 of them, have them in a bucket, and then you'd have a loop, figure-of-8 loop on the end of your main line, and you just lasso a new one on. So if you caught a tench, or if you messed up the cast, or if you caught a carp, or whatever it was, you're back out there fishing with a solid bag presentation in really short order. We didn't quite get round the problem that I had in my mind of packing it all in there tight, which I wasn't all that keen on. And I always thought there must be a really, really simple way of fishing a bag presentation on the end of the line. On the end of the line with the weight in front of it, so that when you cast it, the lead is on the end of the line, the bag's behind it, so it's going to cast really, really well. Any distance, no wobble, super accurate. And I thought about it, there's different ways of doing it, and I tried threading bags onto lead core, which was all right, but helicopters coming back again now, but occupational hazards and all that. And I found threading it onto the lead core was okay, but if you were doing a cast, you know, with wet lead core, obviously it was a complete nightmare. So anyway, eventually I arrived at doing it in a new kind of way for me. I'd never seen it in print, and I thought I'm going to try it like this. So the presentation goes like this. It's a short braided hook link, which we've just tied up with a little pop-up and a bunch of maggots. It's fished on a helicopter system, like that. If you're not allowed to use lead core, you can set this up on your line using a naked sort of chod system, but where allowed, I like to use it on a short leader because of its durability. On the end of that, we have a quick change link. That's it, on the end of that leader. And this is the trick. You get a lead, and to the lead you tie a boom of coated material. I find coated material to be better than anything else because it's durable. You could use thick mono, but then it produces a really big knot where you make that figure-of-8 at the top. So something like 20-pound coated braid is bang on. And you tie to your lead a link of the size of bag that you're going to use, which we'll go into in a minute, but generally a 3 to 4 inch link of something like that is about right. Lead size obviously varies dependent on the distance that you want to cast. Most of the range that I use these bags is short range up to about 70 or 80 yards, so for long chucks I might drop it down to a 2, but generally it's about a 2.5 ounce lead, don't go much bigger than that. If I was going to fish out a long way, then I might up the lead significantly, maybe 3.5, and drop the boom down really short and fish a tiny little bag. It'll all become clear in a minute. But this stem is the carrier of your bag. So I'm going to make a bag, we're going to put it on the stem, attach it to the leader, and it'll all become very clear. It's very simple, but it's a very effective little tactic. So we need a funnel system. Because we're using maggots, then the mesh that's the fine mesh rather than the standard hex mesh is the one you need to be using. Otherwise they will all just come pouring out of those holes at a furious rate. And we're going to get some of the mix, which is the one we've already knocked up: boilie crumb, pellets, maggots, liquids, and we're going to compress it down with the plunger, get it nice and compact in there like that. As I said, we're trying to make a bag that is about the length of the stem on the lead, so a little bit more bait than that, like so, and just push that down like so. You can be quite firm with it. Obviously you don't want to be popping the maggots, but you can be quite firm with it. You want quite a tight bag for aerodynamicy and also speed of breakdown time. So we're just going to push this sausage of bait out through here, keeping it all nice and tight. There we go. There we go. Okay, take the plunger out of the equation, and there's your bag. Loads and loads of incredibly attractive food items in there. And what we're going to do is tie it off nice and tight and compact. You can see why I call it a depth charge, because it makes a kind of sausage shaped barrel. And you can use this over bait if you're spomming. But I have to say, a lot of the fishing that I've done with this has just been a single cast. Now that is a lot of bait. When that melts down, you'll have a dinner plate sized area of attraction, and that is really, in the winter, all you're going to need. And the great thing about these is that when you've cast this out, if you're going to recast, you bring it in, you're clipped up to the same spot, you put a fresh one out, you're adding to the area all the time. If you catch a fish, same deal, you clip up and you go back to the same zone to try and build that. I always think of it, it's like, in fact, there was a few sessions I had last year where I had big hits of fish, you know, like 8 in a day, and fish over 40 pounds as well. This was the tactic I was using on the Sticky Reflections video where I caught that incredible 42-pound common. So this isn't an armchair tactic. I've had a lot of good fish on this. And if you get a bite, I always imagine that because this hook bait is you know, he's sitting low, but he's available and he's just wafting next to it, the hook bait probably goes quite early when the fish arrives on the scene. As that fish kicks up, hooks itself and bolts off, then all of these tiny food items are doing that on the bottom and spreading out a little bit. So you cast another fresh one there. It's a great way of building an area, either through bites or repeated casting. With a bit of accuracy and using the clip on your reel and some wrapping sticks, you can build up an area of very intense attraction in a very unusual way. So we've got our depth charge there, and the next thing we need is a stick needle. Sure, I've got one in here somewhere. And we're going to put the stick needle up the middle of the bag. Sometimes you burst the odd maggot on the inside of the bag, but I've never found any problems with a wet needle coming out the other end. So this is what we're aiming for, about the length of a stick needle. I'm going to get my lead on its boom, pop that onto the gate, shut the gate, and then pull that through. And you should end up with a loop that is just sticking out of the top of the bag like so. Next thing you do, go back to your leader. As I said to you earlier, you've got a quick change link on the end there, and you are just going to pop that, see how quick and easy that is, straight onto that link and thread it all the way around, and then sheath it with a rubber sleeve that you have on the end of your leader. So that is the depth charge PVA system. I take the rig, and making sure I don't hook any maggots, I just nick it in the side like that. It means your hook link is ready extended. It cannot tangle. Because it's popped up slightly buoyant, it always makes its way to the top of the melted bag. Your lead is on the end of the line. So this casts really well. It casts accurately, it casts straight, and it's just so easy. You know, you've got a lead stem, you can make up a few of these bags, and it is, you mess up a cast or you catch a fish or whatever, you just wind it in and thread on another bag. It's really, really pain-free, easy, simple, and it's caught me an awful lot of big fish. We'll have a look at this in the edge. As I said, you can vary this according to what you're faced with. And if I wanted to go out maybe 100 yards or something or more, I might drop the bag down to an inch, inch and a half, and up the lead size. But generally speaking, this is about right for most of the fishing I've been doing, up to 70 or 80 yards. 2.5 ounce lead. You've probably got a total casting weight here of about 4.5 ounces, maybe 5 ounces. So with something fairly beefy, you know, a 3 1/4, 3.5 pound test curve rods, I use 3.5 pound 𝗀𝗿𝗁 Grays rods. It's going to go out there nice and easy. You need thick, durable main line. You're going to be casting these things out with 10 pound line or any of that rubbish. Again, I use a braided main line where most of the time, so there's no problem there. But a good 15 pound carp line, and you'll be absolutely fine. So that is the first live demo of what I call the depth charge PVA presentation. It's caught me a lot of big fish. Give it a go. Now inside this is one of my most important winter tools. Any guesses for what might be in there? This is as important to me in the winter as my Polaroids are to me in the summer. Couldn't go fishing without it, and it's definitely caught me a lot of extra fish down the years. So this guy. Laser pens are absolutely vital. In fact, there's some lakes I go to, if you said I could go with a laser pen and 2 rods, or no laser pen and 4 rods, I'd take the 2 rod option. They have a lot of different uses. Obviously, you need to use these sensibly, and anyone watching this who gets hold of one and uses it stupidly will be doing not only themselves a great disservice, but also carp anglers in general who use these discreetly and sensibly as a very effective tool. These have a multitude of uses, as I said. First of all, they can keep birds off your baited area, which is probably the fundamental key use, which prevents birds getting hooked up on rigs, which of course we all want. So that's a really good thing. But of course in the winter, when you're not using much bait, you might only have a few baits down there, or a bag or a couple of spoms or something, not much, as opposed to the summer where you get birds diving on you and you've got a lot of bait down there. You can almost tolerate. If you've just got a little bit of bait and it's set, the last thing you need is a coot or a tufty going down there and displacing it all and disturbing everything. So keeping birds off your area is a massive part of it. And tufties at this time of year will very often come in at night. You know, they'll turn up at 2, 3 in the morning, and they will find your baited area. I never used to work out how they used to do that, you know, especially in very deep water, or particularly in very deep water. It was always a bit of a conundrum, because me and my mates used to think, well, they can't be smelling it, because if you try and smell anything underwater, you're going to drown. But recently I was out with a friend of ours, and he's a police dog handler, and he explained to me how they use different types of police dogs for finding cadavers, dead bodies basically, in inland waterways. So they'll find bodies in lakes using a dog, a sniffer dog, that's on the boat. And they'll take the boat up and down grid fashion. And they go over a body. If it's 30 foot down, sniffer dog will find it. It's interesting, isn't it? So there's no doubt in my mind that tufties are similarly capable of detecting the smell coming off of any kind of bait on the bottom. You know, a lot of the stuff we use is designed to come up through the water column, and they will find it, and they will find it at 2 or 3 in the morning. And another thing I like to do is, again, if no one's opposite you, don't disturb other anglers. But if I get up for a wee or something in the night, or even if I just wake up and it's this time of year, I know that somewhere out there those tufties will have come in. And just by taking a minute, a second, just to sweep the area with your beam, you'll hear them take off in fear, flocks of them sometimes. Just that one thing could mean that rod goes 2 hours later with a carp. You know, you need everything stacked in your favour as far as you can possibly get it. If you shine a laser pen down through the water column, you'll find that beam will go down through the water just as easily as it will go through the air. So I don't shine it into the lake. I don't think it's really going to upset the carp any more than we used to watch them with torches under snags. You know, they might just slowly move away, but it probably won't help matters. So I don't shine it into the water, don't shine it near other anglers, and definitely don't be shining it up into the sky, because that is how lasers are going to get banned because of problems with aircraft. Another use that I have for this, and it's another thing that's caught me carp without a shadow of doubt, is when you're looking at an area and it's full of bird life. You know, you get there in the evening, or there's loads of tufties or whatever time of day, and they're all out there. If it's dark enough or gloomy enough to use a laser pen, sweep the area and the birds will move out the way. Now, if you're trying to spot a carp show and there might only be one show on a freezing cold January afternoon, you've got a lot more chance of seeing that one fish when there aren't 150 birds in that area as well. So that is a really good edge, and it's another use for the laser pen. Another one, which has definitely caught me carp again, is you hear a fish in the night, or you think you've heard a fish. You go to look where it is, and you're not sure, was it a bird, was it a fish? With this, you know straight away, because you just glance over the area with the laser pen. If you don't hear any birds take off, you know it was a fish, and that's gold dust information. So these are just a few examples of where this can be a massive asset, and as I said, it's something that I would never be without. Get the most powerful one you can afford. Green beams tend to be about the brightest, and when it's really cold like it is today, cold lasers do not work very well at all. So if you're struggling for output, just hold it over the stove, just warm the case up, and it will be back to performing like Luke Skywalker's lightsaber in no time at all. So essential. So a few final thoughts on rigs. Hook sharpness, absolutely paramount any time of the year, as I've explained in the video on presentation and hook sharpening. In the winter, when the fish aren't moving much at all, it's absolutely essential. It's so important. One of the things that I would definitely say I've learned over a few decades of winter carp fishing is that smaller is better. And that applies to the background bait that I'm putting in, bits and pieces, maggots, 𝗀𝗰𝗀𝗀. It applies to the hook bait. I always want a small hook bait. But it also applies to the tackle itself. And I'm always very keen to drop down in hook size in the winter, and if I can, down in hook link size as well. Believe me, you are not going to catch as many fish. If you're fishing a tricky water that gets a lot of pressure, you are not going to get as many bites fishing a size 4 hook with a 25-pound thick coated hook link material as you are on something like an 8 or even a 10 and a 10 or 12-pound hook link material. I promise you. I've thought long and hard about why that might be, because we all accept and know and realise that in the winter, carp being cold-blooded, their senses are muted, and taste, sight, even sound awareness are all working at lower percentage rates than they would be when the water temperature is at a higher climb. So why would that be? And I think the reason, to my mind, is that the carp are feeding much more slowly, much more cautiously, which means that when a rig goes in its mouth, it is in there for a bit longer before it might realise anything is wrong. Now, if you have got a great big thick hook link and a big hook, and that slow-moving carp, slow-moving carp are the enemy of all of our presentations. Now, we need fish to react and move in order to be able to hook them. You need a reaction from the fish. So with a slow-moving carp that has picked up something that it straight away realised is not what it wants in its mouth, it will be able to get rid of that without bolting a lot more likely than it may be able to do in the summer, where they're a bit more on edge, they're a bit more flighty, and whoa, that's it, and they're off, and you've got that run. I think with something like a thinner hook link and an 8 or a 10, it's in the mouth for an awful lot longer before it realises, and the longer it's in the mouth, the more chance you've got of hooking that fish. So super sharp 8s and 10s are generally where I'm at. If the water is really, really weedy, then, or certainly if you snag fishing, then make sure you choose a very, very strong size 8, or maybe go up a bit to a 7 or a 6. Generally speaking, I've always found that really small hooks give phenomenal hook holds. You know, I remember back when we were using the dynamite stick a long, long time ago with bits of 𝗶𝗰𝗹𝘂𝗀𝗃 in the winter, and people like Nick and a few others were using, well, we were all using size 10 big T's, which is a straight pointed hook, obviously small, so size 10, and we didn't used to lose any. The pressure, I mean, Nick used to use them for snag fishing, never lost any. So don't think that it's all about big hooks. Small hooks have got a big part to play, and certainly at this time of year, I think they've got an enormous role to play. So think about your tackle, think about refining things as much as possible. I remember the old days of Ritchie McDonald, for example, when the supreme of big carp anglers, when he was on the Car Park Lake and on the North Lake and the other 𝗀𝗍𝗁 lakes, and he always used to swear by dropping down to 8-pound mainline, straight down to 8-pound mainline. He reckoned that it was just so much more tactile and sensitive, and the fish were less aware of it. And whilst I wouldn't recommend that, because a lot of lakes these days have got thick weed and much bigger fish, I think a lot of what Ritchie was thinking were true, you know. And if you talk to any match anglers will always tell you that when the match fishing is hard, dropping down from a 12 to a 14 or from a 14 to an 18 can make the biggest of differences. And you can apply some of that thinking to your carp fishing. If it's not too windy, keep your sensitivity up high, keep your volumes down low so you don't disturb other anglers, but try and refine your fishing as much as possible. Be as accurate as you can and assess things constantly. Just while I think about liners and sensitivity, fluorocarbon versus braid. I mean, it's certainly true that braid will get you a lot more liners if your water is murky and at night. But of course, during the day, if your water is clear, then that's going to stand out quite visually. If the carp can see your line, they probably won't swim into it, therefore precluding chances of liners. So I would say that if you're going to use something, if you're fishing for liners, then something like a fluorocarbon or something that is held up through the water column is going to get you more little bleeps and knocks and liners, which we're looking for because the fish can't see it. A lot of my fishing is done with braid, but I fish it very, very close to the bottom, quite often with a little back lead or something like that. But just bear that in mind, that, you know, if you are fishing a super clear water, then you may not be able to get liners during the day if you're fishing braid, for obvious reasons. If fish see it, they're going to avoid it. So there are a few thoughts. I think probably good to summarise on motivation and laziness. And I think winter fishing, it tempts all of us to become a bit more lazy because we want to be comfortable when it's absolutely freezing cold. But that can be very, very costly. I remember the winter before last, you know, where I was on a lake where it was all about evening manoeuvres. The fish were very active in the nocturnal hours, and my mate John used to put his DVD player on, and, you know, he'd be, as soon as it got to about 4:30, it'd be like, we'd be standing there watching the lake, and then he'd be off back to Izzy, say, I'll see you in a few hours, I want to go and watch a film or watch the football. And I'd put on another coat and stand, if I hadn't seen anything, and stand and watch and watch and watch. And I remember this particular night, about 6:30 in the evening, a couple of hours after he had gone, I heard a fish over in the corner, and then I heard another one, and I went round there, and sure enough the fish was showing in this little bay. So I packed up, moved and got round there, and got fishing for these carp. And I think it was about 8:30 in the evening, my phone started ringing. Hello mate, it was John. Where are you? I've just been walked up to your swim. I said, oh, I've moved over to the bay opposite. And just at that moment, a flyer on the left-hand rod. And we always laughed about it, because ever since then, John hasn't really been into his DVDs or his football. And you have to decide what you really want. Yes, we want to be comfortable, but what are we really there for? We want to catch a carp. And whilst you need to be comfortable, and I recommend winter skins and ground sheets and so on, if it's going to stop you moving, then don't take it. It doesn't matter how much gear I take, as long as I'm happy to move it. So always bear that in mind, that the more you put into your carp fishing at any time of year, the more you will get out of it. But particularly in the winter, it's a time that really sorts the men from the boys, so to speak, and there isn't any room for laziness if you want those really, really good results. So as I said earlier, the difference in what separates anglers is very, very rarely a type of rig or a type of bait. It's in you and what you're prepared to do. Whilst I've been out here, I haven't caught anything. The lake's fishing pretty terrible, but I've seen a couple of mates posting things from around the country, and one of them caught a 52-pound mirror a couple of days ago on Monday when it was absolutely brutally cold. So there's always a chance. Choose your winter venue carefully, follow the guidelines that I've told you, use the rigs and the bait combinations that I've showed you with complete confidence. And in future videos we might go out on the circuit a little bit and see if we can put some of those to the test, but I can assure you they have been thoroughly tested. None of the stuff I talk about or show you is armchair tactics. None of it is just stuff that's floating through my mind. It's stuff that has been tried and tested through a lot of winters over a lot of years while I've been accumulating all of this grey on my chin. So I'm passing it on to you guys. Really hope that it stands you in good stead, and good luck. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, tag a mate in and share it please, and I really look forward to seeing you on an upcoming Carpology JRC production.